You're tuned in to The Last Radio Show.
Hello and welcome to The Last Radio Show. I'm John Lynch.
I'm Jenn Reilly.
And this is a show where we talk about all kinds of stuff. We talk about news, history, pop culture. Today, we're going to get a little deep and philosophical.
Ooh.
We're going to dig some layers here.
Okay.
We're going to make the age-old discussion of how old you're only as old as you feel. Have you ever heard that expression?
Of course.
How old do you feel right now?
I mean, about 95 today.
I feel about 110 myself. I feel like I'm getting older every day, which I guess I am. I mean, technically that's true.
Totally. That is true. All of us are.
But I do think there is a perception now that people are more active later in life than they were maybe in the previous generation. And people are, I think, kind of like looking at life like, well, okay, when I get to 50, I'm old. But some people, when they get to 50, they start thinking, well, when I get to 60, I'm going to be old. And when
we just keep pushing it back.
We keep pushing it back down the line. So what do you consider old age?
I mean, me personally?
Yeah.
That's a loaded question. I don't know. The older I get, the further it goes. That's how it works.
Exactly. I mean, I guess retirement age is 65, so I guess that's kind of an over-under, but most people don't retire at 65 now.
Right. Well, that's the problem, right?
Yeah, you know what I mean? I mean, there are financial reasons for that people can't afford to do that nowadays.
Right.
But, like 62 is early retirement and 65 is full retirement.
Right, and you get Medicare at 65.
Yeah.
But have you noticed that AARP magazines start coming at 40? I don't know.
I've been getting those for years now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very disturbing when I got the first one. I was like, what's up with this?
Yeah.
And, but what's interesting now is like, The Who had a song, talking about my generation where they say, I hope I die before I get old.
Right.
They're singing that into their 80s. So,
right.
So
they probably pushed it out. They're thinking 120.
They pushed it up. When they wrote that song, they were in their 20s, but now they're still on a concert playing that song, which is kind of bizarre and kind of crazy.
All right. Well, what about the Beatles? They thought 64, right? That's
right. When I'm 64, Paul McCartney is in his 80s now. And he's still touring, and so is Ringo.
Right.
And the other ones died very young. That's the other side of it too. What is the age when you hear that somebody passes away and you initially think like, oh boy, they were young?
I know. I feel terrible when that happens. Yeah. When people are like, oh, well, they were
right.
Whatever,
Right. Like,
I don't think there is an age anymore. I think it depends on the person. Cause I had an aunt that was 103 years old.
Wow.
And she was like, at 99, she was a spring chicken, having a whiskey. Like, it was just, I mean, so when she died, it wasn't like, oh, she was 103. It was like, oh, Aunt May died.
Right.
She was still alive,
Yeah. Now, people, one of the reasons for the shift in perception and maybe shift in reality is people are taking better care of themselves than they did previously.
Yes.
As overall, as a people, we're probably eating better. Medicine is better.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to live a little longer and live at a better quality of life.
Yes.
That definitely helps things. And, the big saying is, 50 is the new 30.
Right. Well, we also look better. That's the thing. Better. Like we dye our hair, we Botox. There's a lot going on that,
And, we're also starting adulthood later. Like when my dad was in his early 20s, he was married, had 2 kids, had a full-time job, was a veteran, had already been in the war.
Like a whole life in there.
and he was like 23,
Yeah.
Like 23, I was still living at home and still trying to figure out what I was going to do for my career. And Dad would look at me like, at your age, know. But I mean, that's just the way things, in the 50s and 40s and 60s and 70s even, people were getting out of the house. People weren't staying in school as long. Not everybody went to college.
Right.
A lot of people, when they graduated high school, they were done.
Exactly. Sure.
And, now most people or a lot of people go to college and, spend those years and, those first few years, I still feel like I'm trying to figure out adulthood.
Totally. I feel that way too. However, I did ask my children in prep for this, how old is old? And it's interesting. So the 9-year-old said, the 9-year-old said 52. Okay. The 12-year-old said 40.
Wow.
And the smart guy, 16-year-old, said, well, how old are you? I was like, interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, when you're a kid, your uncles or whoever, whatever adults are in there, they seem like they're a million years old.
Exactly.
If you have a cousin who was a teenager when you were like 5 or 6, you thought they were an adult.
Right.
They were, and they might have been like 14.
And did you ever look at an old picture of like Uncle whoever and say, how old was he in this picture? And he was like 35, and you thought he was 60, right?
Right, exactly. And people, I don't know if it was the way people dressed or, people were smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day and having whiskey for breakfast, in those days too. But just recently, a baseball player, Ed Kranepool, passed away. Now, if anybody out there is a Met fan, they know the name Ed Kranepool.
Okay.
He played for the Mets. He started in 1962 with the Mets and played his whole career there and played for like 18, 20 years with the Mets. And when he was signed by the Mets in 1962, he was 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
So when he passed away, they were showing these pictures of like his first day as a Met, where he's standing next to the manager and, it's like this 17-year-old kid just joining the Mets. He looked like he was 40.
Yeah.
He did not look like a 17-year-old kid.
Yeah.
He looked like, like he was, he should be like, have grandkids almost at this point,
It's unbelievable.
And that's just, and he was, and he was an athlete. So, I mean, he was in good shape, It wasn't even like, he was like a worn down guy. He was a baseball player.
They were just more mature back then. They made him more mature.
They were. But even more recently, like, I was thinking about Wilford Brimley, of course, actor. He was, did a lot of different stuff. Best known, I guess, for the diabetes commercials.
Right.
And he would do the oatmeal commercials too, I think they were, but he was obviously in a lot of movies and stuff too. And his big movie was Cocoon, which, the movie came in the 80s, which was about a bunch of senior citizens. And it came out in I think in the mid 80s. How old do you think he was when he starred as a senior citizen in that movie?
So I always would think he was like in his 60s. But that's not true, right?
He was 49.
49, right.
49. Now, some people do look older. The gray hair helps. Some people go gray very early.
Yeah.
So
the gray hair, that's a big thing. That really changed the dynamic.
That is, the first time, you see a few grays on the side of your hair, you kind of freak out a little bit, And I always joke with my son I didn't have any gray hairs until he was born, because he actually gave them to. But on the flip side of the Wilford Brimley thing, I'm going to list off a couple of celebrities here, and you tell me how old you think they are.
Okay.
Jennifer Aniston.
I mean, how old does she look, or how old? Because she's been around for so long.
Yeah.
I mean, based on looks, I would say she was in her 40s, but I know she's in her 50s.
She's 56 right now.
Yeah.
Jennifer Lopez.
Also, probably, I would say 40s looking.
Yep.
50s probably.
Now, this is the guy who everybody talks about all the time when they talk about how young people look. Paul Rudd.
Oh, God, I don't know. He's 12, right? I have no idea. I don't know, because he's a tricky one, because Clueless was quite a while ago.
Right, yeah, that was in the mid-90s, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so he's got to be in his 50s also, right?
He is 55 right now.
Yeah.
Gwen Stefani from No Doubt.
Oh, she's just ageless also.
Yep.
But I guess 50s.
Yep, 55.
Yeah.
Lenny Kravitz, the singer Lenny Kravitz.
Oh. I have no idea.
He is 60 years old.
Really?
Yep. Looks.
Wow.
He's doing commercials now and stuff like. He hasn't had a hit song in a while,
right?
But he appears in a lot of things. But he has a daughter who's a great actress right now and winning Oscars and stuff. So
right.
So he's got the. How about Mario Lopez?
Mario
he started
Lopez
as a young actor in Saved by the Bell, of course, and everything.
Yeah. See, when I was younger, I always thought these people were much older than me. So now I'm trying to say, well, like, I guess he's got to be 50.
He's 51 right now.
51, okay.
So, yeah.
He's not so much older than me than I thought.
You're catching up. It's
amazing
how that works out.
Awful.
It's amazing how that works out, isn't it? But yeah, so according to to some of the official like scientific explanations of some of this thing, the United Nations considers old age to start around 60.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that's, now, of course, we're looking at this from perspective of here in the United States, and we're talking about celebrities and all this kind of stuff. And, obviously celebrities have the advantage of, living a less stressful lifestyle than probably everyday people do. They have the advantage of getting, plastic surgeries, getting this lifted, and getting having a personal trainer and all this kind of stuff. So, if you're talking about people who are in poorer countries, they probably age quicker too in terms of how they look. And they probably have a shorter life expectancy on top of that too.
Well, it also depends on what what the bar is, because in this country, there's a certain look that's like younger, and then there's an older, younger look, right? Like almost like, they had some work done, they're not exactly 40 or 20 or 30. I don't know.
Right, exactly. So like when you see somebody now, let's talk about the getting the work done thing, because again, and this ties in with a lot of these celebrities. Do you think Jennifer Aniston had work done?
Oh, I mean, a little bit. Nip and tuck.
She must have had something, right?
Nothing drastic,
Right. I mean, she still looks pretty much the same as she did back when she was on Friends.
Right.
Obviously a little older, but, it's not like, sometimes when people get plastic surgery, it just does not go well. And,
Meg Ryan, I'm telling you, I don't know what happened.
That's Kenny Rogers. Remember Kenny Rogers when he got plastic, and it looked like it was just like a freak show kind of thing basically going on. And again, these are people who have a lot of money and, should have like the best resources to get quality work done. But
the people you mentioned before, all the women, Jennifer Lopez and Gwen Stefani, they all look fantastic. They really do. I mean, I think, as far as I'm concerned.
But, when you bring up the thing of having the work done, that applies more to the women too.
Yes, that's true.
Nobody really ever says that about a guy.
I know. Why is George Clooney ageless and he's just gorgeous forever? It's so unfair.
It's funny because George Clooney looked kind of older when he was younger.
Yeah.
And he just kind of stayed there. Like, I think he hit mid-50s and stopped, but he did that in his 40s.
Yeah, you're right.
He's just frozen there.
Yeah, even when he was younger, in Facts of Life, he kind of had an older look to him.
He kind of had,
he grew into it.
If you could put him in, like an old time 40s suit, when he was 18, you probably would have thought he was in his 40s.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's got an old school kind of look.
Yeah.
But then you got guys who are still, being very productive in Hollywood, like Harrison Ford. Ford, does not look young. But yet he's still out there, and he's still making movies. He was just in a Marvel movie where he played a Hulk, where he's doing all kinds of special effects stuff. And obviously, but I remember when he did the more recent Indiana Jones movies, and I think we mentioned this when we were talking about Star Wars the last show, that it is a little sad when you see him out there now, because he's not quite Indiana Jones anymore, even though he's still playing Indiana Jones.
Yeah, he's weathered for sure.
He's weathered, and again, that's more you say that about a guy. You would never say a woman is weathered.
I know this is all it's
very sexist.
Unfair, it's sexist, right? The men work forever, they have kids forever, the whole thing.
Exactly.
Now, actually, one of the things that we think about, when you think of how old women are. As on television, the Golden Girls are always something that pops up because they were in their 50s, 60s. You thought that they were so much older, and they're in their 50s. I mean, B. Arthur and Jennifer Aniston probably the same age at that time.
Right, exactly. And B. Arthur always looked like an older woman.
Right.
She was, when she was on Maude in the 70s.
Yes, that's true too.
And, she looked like an older woman.
Well, she rocked her gray hair early, I think, too. Right?
If I'm not mistaken, in the Golden Girls, the one who played her Maude's B. Arthur's mother, was actually the youngest of the four of them.
Yes, it's Estelle Getty. She was the youngest.
Yes, yeah. And she played older.
Yeah, she was. It's crazy. She did, but she looked. She looked good when she took her wig off and stuff. She kind of.
Oh yeah, definitely. She didn't. If I remember correctly, she didn't really have that much gray hair.
No, I think she dyed it red.
She actually, it's kind of funny that they were playing such an older role. Now, recently, I saw an interview with Marissa Tomei, and I guess she's in her mid-50s too.
She's got to be
around that. But she was talking about how at some point, about relatively recently, she started taking roles playing a mom. Or she's in the Marvel movies. She's in the Spider-Man movies as the aunt of Spider-Man, Aunt May.
Right.
And what's funny about that, in the comic books, Aunt May in Spider-Man comic books was a little old lady.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like, and then Marissa told me, and they make jokes about it that, like, oh, his aunt's actually pretty hot.
Right.
So they actually reference that in the movie. And in other Spider-Man movies, older actresses had played, Sally Field had played Aunt May in the previous Spider-Man movies.
Oh, okay.
And, before that, it was another actress whose name I don't know off the top of my head.
Now, were they older?
They were definitely older.
Oh, okay. They were
older, yeah. But each like incarnation of the Spider-Man movies, because there's been like 3 different like versions of Spider-Man that they've made movies of. There was the Tobey Maguire, there was the Andrew Garfield, and now there's the Tom Holland movies. So each time they've made Aunt May a little bit younger. And
she's getting hotter.
She's getting hotter, and we could bring up the MILF part of this whole kind of thing, and we I think most people know what that stands for, so we'll keep it clean here.
Yes.
But
Marissa Tomei actually looks great. She looks fantastic. Yeah.
But she did talk about, like, at some point, when she agreed to play these roles where she was playing the mom or the aunt or whatever it was, she's like, I stopped getting other roles. Like, that's who I became. I became a mom character.
Yeah.
And,
well, unfortunately for women, there's just not a lot of like older, romantic lead. True. There just isn't. I mean, it's just people just, I guess, don't want to see it. I don't know. Or maybe we should change that.
Yeah. It's funny how, like, we talk about age, and it shifted pretty quickly into sexism.
Yes.
and it's kind of funny how that really is a big part of it.
Well, because like aging is rough. I mean, obviously for men and women, but I'm personally, like, I'm feeling it. I'm like, I knew I was going to get old, but I didn't know, like, I'd lose my eyesight and I'd get gray hair. Like, I had no idea. Shocking.
Now, the first time you tried to read something and you had to kind of pull it away a little bit, do you remember that distinctly? Or
because it was recently. It was like within the last couple of years where I just was like, well, I can't see that. And then you go out with my girlfriends the other day. We all went out for brunch, my high school girlfriends, and everyone whipped out their readers. And one was like, you guys need readers? We were like, you don't?
And you don't?
Yeah. So it's like, it's shocking. It happens. You never think it's going to happen to you, and then it does, and you're like, what?
Right.
Yeah. But again, I'm actually like kind of happy that they're pushing off the old age, stigma to later on. I mean, I'll take 50 as the new 30.
Yeah, I'm in my 50s, so yeah,
right. Yeah.
At this point,
so. I like to know I have a little life left in me.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to kind of wrap things up at any given point.
Yeah.
And but the other thing about it too is that with the health stuff, you are living a better quality of life too.
Yes.
If you are. You're going to be able to get around. I mean, a lot of people I know who I went to high school with and, college with, and who I'm still in touch with, like all of a sudden I hear, oh yeah, Scott, he got a hip replacement.
Yes. That's a big thing.
Oh my God. But, he was, but my friend did get that done, and, he's like hopping around now, like no problem.
Yeah. That's true too. That's another thing that you mentioned, that the hip replacements and knee replacements are all like extending the body. I mean, it's just that they're actual like physical, like almost like tools to extend your body's lifespan. It's crazy. You can be running around, just get everything replaced. I know somebody 2 hip replacements, a knee replacement, a shoulder. I mean, they're bionic.
Right. They kind of are. Yeah, they're becoming cyborgs now at this point.
It's crazy.
You're right. Now, with the other thing that I always get a kick out of, and I'm going to tell you a little story. Not too long ago, I was on a train. I was on the Long Island Railroad, coming home on a train. It was very crowded, and I had to stand up. And there were these 2 guys who were, I would say, a few years older than me, but not much older than me. And we were all standing by the doorway. And these 2 guys didn't know each other, but they started talking. And it turns out they were both in some kind of construction kind of jobs, and they I guess one had a shirt on or something, and they struck up a conversation and started. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just kind of standing next to them while these 2 guys are having a conversation. I'm kind of eavesdropping, and they're talking about their jobs and all this kind of stuff. And they drifted into talking about music.
Okay.
And they were talking about like music today. Oh boy, music today sucks.
Oh,
when you get to that point, when you hear a new song, you're like, Taylor Swift. And by the way, Taylor Swift's been around for 15 years now.
Yeah.
So she's not even really new music anymore, but she's, the biggest pop star going at the moment. But they were talking literally about Taylor Swift, and they were like, she's terrible. What? How come, you don't hear stuff like Kiss? And I'm like, well, if you're a Kiss fan, you're probably not going to be a Taylor Swift fan. It has nothing to do with, how long they've been around and how new they are. It's just, there's
That's hysterical.
We both have worked in radio, and there is a perception when you're like picking the music for a radio station. And as you know, I programmed a radio station at one time. You basically, if you have a target audience, if you want to target, let's say, your target audience you want to be is between 35 and 55, and that's the demographic you want to reach. What you do is you go right in the middle of that demographic. Mm-hmm. And you try and figure out when that person was in high school.
Oh, right.
In high school.
Smart.
And that's when they were the coolest. Mm-hmm. That's when they were, that's when they were listening to new music. That's when they were going out and buying new music.
And that's what they want to hear, right? They want to just relive that.
Yeah, so if you were a senior in high school in '86, you're gonna love all that '80s music, and Wham is gonna be like your favorite band, or whoever it might be. Or if you were a senior in high school in '92, Nirvana is the band that you love, and
right. But that's actually changing now because all of the old music is now new again. So my kids will be singing these songs. I'll be like, "How do you know that song?" They're like,
right.
"Oh, it's on TikTok, or it's been redone." But the cool thing about working in radio as older people, I will say, is that I can say I was singing like Dua Lipa and Sabrina Carpenter, and my daughter's like, "How do you know that?" I'm like, "I'm just cool."
Right.
Mom, I was listening to it 100 times I was at the station, but yeah,
exactly. I got brainwashed by it.
Exactly.
That's okay. That's okay. But
that's when she's young too. You got to know the music. So,
and what's interesting too is now too, again, with all the options that are out there for listening to music or for watching TV shows or movies. It used to be back when we were kids. We'll throw that in there because that kind of ties in with the theme. But when I was growing up, the reruns that I would watch in the afternoon as a kid were all from the 60s. Mm-hmm. And even the 50s, there was like Lucille Ball was on all the time in the afternoon. And,
You're right.
And there was, all this kind of stuff. And then Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch, that's what I grew up watching, even though those shows were before I was born.
Right.
Most of them, And,
so that started the shift when you started
so there's like, if you grew up, in the 70s and 80s watching TV before you had cable and way before you had streaming and internet, you were watching 50s and 60s TV shows.
Yeah, that's true.
And now, kids today, throw those in there.
Oh boy. We're really aging ourselves a little bit.
Get off my lawn. But, kids today, there also is like programming specifically for kids. Like there are TV shows on Nickelodeon and Disney that are just like new quality programs just for kids.
Yes, right. We didn't have that.
We really didn't. I mean, there was, I guess Saved by the Bell was maybe the first show along those lines, but there's, all the, not too long ago, Hannah Montana and Sweet Life Jack and all those kind of shows. And then,
that's when Disney realized kids are the real consumers. Like hook them, and
hook them for life.
They became the audience, preferred audience. I think.
So many of the topics we talk about gets back to Disney's greed.
And don't say that because I'm a Disney fan.
I know you're a Disney person,
right?
That came up when we were talking about Star Wars. It came up when we were talking about everything. It's Disney is controlling the world apparently.
That's true.
At this point, but fair enough. We should probably wrap this up because I'm getting tired because I'm not as young as I used to be.
I know.
It's about 4:30. It's about time for my nap.
Listen, don't forget about Aunt Mayo, 105. We're still young.
We're still young. We're not even halfway done yet.
That's right.
Thank you for listening to The Last Radio Show. If you like the show, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review on your favorite platform. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram at The Last Radio Show. We will talk to you soon.
The Last Radio Show.
The Last Radio Show.